Hi everybody, how you doing? Yes, so you may recognize me from such prompts as, please enter your PIN number followed by pound. Yeah, that's me. So yes, I'm the voice of Asterisk from the very beginning, although I was sent a collection of the basement tapes of Mark Spencer actually voicing the beta sounds. So I have those in a file and I think they're collectible and I'm gonna bribe him, maybe just use them for extortion at some point. So yes, I've been involved with the project pretty much since 2003. I got an email from some really hyperactive young guys from Huntsville who wanted me to do a few prompts, and I just thought it was a one-off. And it turned out to be this amazing, recurring, ongoing thing, and allowed me to meet this amazing, amazing community, which I've grown to know and love these developers. I know their wives and children, and yeah, it's just, I hope it never stops, because it's really something I look forward to every year. So yes, in addition to Asterisk, I also voice a lot of not so open source stuff. So I'm starting to do more work with Cisco Meraki, Mitel, Shortel, which got gobbled up by Mitel. And I even do some work with some of the Bells. I do a lot of prompts for Cincinnati Bell and Bell Canada, Hawaiian Telecom, which led to a comic moment where my husband's ex-wife got remarried and had her honeymoon in Hawaii. And she misdialed the number, and she got me telling her that the number had been, yeah, so she's like, oh, there's my husband's ex-wife telling me what to do. So that was, isn't that great? That's like, the number you have dialed. Yeah, no, it wasn't like that at all. So, and of course, it always leads to some very comic moments. My husband downloaded a workout program for BlackBerry back when he loved his BlackBerry. And it was a workout coach that kept you motivated at the gym. And he came home after the first time he used it and he said, guess who's the voice of Endomondo, which was the program. So it was me. They were using the Capstrol text-to-speech Allison voice. So it was me saying, come on, 5 more sit-ups, you can do it. And he hated that. And so he changed it to the Australian male, because I think he gets enough of me at home. So yes, in addition to voicing IVR, which I love doing, and that's my core competency every day, all day long, I actually really, really genuinely care a lot about IVR and the way that it's constructed and crafted. Luckily, a lot of my ongoing clients ask for my input and my suggestions about IVR scripting. And so I blog and I speak a lot about improving IVR, making it easier to use, making it obviously less frustrating for the caller, but also starting people to think more in terms of using the IVR to extend a company's brand. So hopefully if you're an end user, or if you're a reseller or implementer of Asterisk, you are in a position to talk to customers and end users and perhaps maybe influence them to think of IVR as more of an extension of their brand rather than this utility that just goes, for this, press that, for that, press this. I think it's evolved way, way beyond that whole basic instructional utility, if that makes sense. So last year, Digium came out with an amazing document called Why is an IVR Important? And they actually incorporated a lot of my blog articles and content from that. So this is actually where you'll find it. I encourage you to download it because it's sort of a go-to resource that I send a lot of people to. So in this article, and so this presentation is actually kind of an expansion of that article. They quoted a stat from Marketing Land, which was pretty astounding, and that is 74% of callers who encounter a frustrating IVR will choose a competitor after a bad phone experience, after a single bad phone experience. I'm not immune to them. I actually hate speaking on the phone. It's kind of odd because I record telephone systems. I actually hate talking on the phone. But I have my own share of really frustrating experiences on IVRs. So that has been my purpose, is to eliminate this whole idea of the caller frustration. Some IVRs seem almost designed to frustrate callers. So in this article, Why is an IVR Important? They outlined 5 gold standards of IVR. The biggest and probably most important thing is to not offer too many choices. So there are many, many studies out there that sort of try to encapsulate exactly how much the human brain can retain when given a bunch of different choices. How much do people remember? What do they remember about the actual prompt? So my recommendation, actually I'll just get like a little informal survey. How many prompts or how many instructional prompts do people think should be in an opening message? How many choices, in other words? Okay, yep, good. Nobody has two hands up, that's good. Yeah, basically my recommendation is 3 to 5 menu items max. That's literally the only thing that people will recommend or remember. Urgent critical prompts front stacked. So if you offer any kind of emergency services, especially if it deals with basic human safety, make sure you front stack those to the front of the IVR, and also any choices that are the most used choices should probably be front stacked at the very top. And 3 options in a subdirectory, and I think I talked to a few people this week already about subdirectories. I'm not a fan. So absolutely no subdirectories unless it's so necessary, unless you have call center staff that's so specific that they need to have those choices trickling down to various, funneled down choices. I think probably if you had 3 to 5 menu items in the opening greeting, and then if you have to have a subdirectory, limit that to 3 choices. You don't have that many specialized call center staff that deals with those specific areas. Don't make it difficult to speak with the humans. So this is kind of a little bit of a paradox, because I firmly believe that every caller should be offered a live agent option at some point in the process. People generally are turnkey. They want to arrive at a solution to their problem themselves. They probably won't abuse the live agent option. Now, I had a client actually a few weeks ago who wanted to put that, to speak to a live agent, press 0, but he wanted to put it at the very top of the IVR, which I discouraged him from doing. In that instance, I think people definitely will abuse the 0 option and just pound 0 and get to that live agent instead of figuring it out. Generally, especially if you're talking about a younger demographic, most people want to arrive at a conclusion themselves in a turnkey way. They don't want to have to explain it, explain their issue to a live agent again and again. So people generally kind of want to come to a solution on their own. Don't use cookie cutter prompts. So callers really do get sick of the same old lines. Thank you for your patience. Your patience while holding is appreciated. Please listen to all of our options before making a selection. Our IVR has recently changed. Everyone's nodding and laughing. So these are the old hackneyed phrases that for some reason people still feel like they have to be included into your IVR. I maintain that perhaps they don't need to be included. Unless somebody is calling your company repeatedly, they really don't care that your options have changed or that your IVR just got a nice zhuzhing and it's
And they don't frequently change.
They really don't. They actually don't. Yeah, no, it's true. And especially, probably the part that does change are employee directories where, staff drops out or moves to a different extension. But yeah, generally speaking, phone systems don't change as often as people would like to indicate. And this is another really, really tricky one, but don't be afraid to show some personality in the IVR, and I'll get more into that later on the presentation. It is your chance to do something unique. So again, instead of just instructional driven prompts, there is an opportunity to introduce some personality and to perhaps use that IVR as a way of reinforcing exactly what the company is like and gives the caller some idea of what it will be like to conduct business with them. Don't try to do too much with an IVR. So never ever forget that it is a method to do basic sorting. My very first IVR job was with TELUS, which is the big telephony concern in Alberta where I live. And their lead IVR developer had a great explanation for IVR. He said it's kind of like an escalator with people with various different colored jackets riding up the escalator. And those People with the blue jackets get shuttled off to the left, and those people maybe with the white jackets get shuttled off to the right, and then all miscellaneous colors go forward to be sorted into further factions. And it's a visualization that I never actually forgot, because that is the basic utility of an IVR. But I try to emphasize that most callers will still need some human interaction. Another thing that I always try to urge people to remember is that most people will go to a website and then phone a company. So if you just kept that in mind when designing an IVR, that perhaps the people that will call in have a question that is so specific, or you need to entertain the idea that perhaps they're incredibly unhappy and that they need to explain their specific problem to an actual human person. So don't rule out the idea. Even though people are turnkey, they will probably eventually need some human interaction. And it's really key to remember that the IVR is not a substitute for service. It's not there to serve your customers. It is there to prime them for service. It is there to prepare the customers for live human interaction, if that makes sense. I hope so. This is really tricky, and I wish Matt Florell was here. Is he here? He's not here. So ask for feedback from callers. So a lot of people, if they have a post-call survey, very seldom will they ask callers to evaluate their actual phone system. And unless the caller is me, I sometimes, after I've gotten what I've wanted from the live agent, I'll say, by the way, I'm in the business of evaluating and voicing IVR, and you should know that you have too many choices, blah, blah, blah. Often they don't care. And often they'll say, oh, that's really a useful suggestion. I'll try to pass that on to whoever designs our IVR. Most people in a call center don't know. So, but I think it's actually an interesting idea to, first of all, track any call drop-off and at what point callers disengage and drop out of an IVR. It's very, very useful information to know. It can let you know if your choices are confusing, if the choices are a little too similar to each other, and customers literally do not know which one to pick. So sometimes using some sort of metrics to track that call drop-off can be an important aspect. And very few companies ask for feedback on the system. So if you're doing kind of a short 2 or 3 question survey at the end of the call, as a lot of companies are prone to do, it would not be a bad idea to include a question that says, how easy was it for you to use our phone system? Or ask them to elaborate on that. I think it's a great idea. And pay attention to that feedback. It can tell you a lot about the state of mind of the customer. And again, using that marketing land stat, you definitely don't want to contribute to that high number of people that will absolutely disengage from a company with one bad experience on the phone. So in that article, they actually included a really old blog post that I wrote probably when I first started voicing the Asterisk system. It was the 15 commandments of IVR, and they kind of boiled it down into 15 kind of little handy steps, so we'll just go through those. So it's really key. Do not overestimate your callers' attention spans or their patience. Both of them are shorter than you think. Alex is nodding, absolutely. So think about how busy you are. Think about what a huge investment of time it is when you actually decide, oh gosh, I have to call the tax service, or I have to call motor vehicles, or I have to call any large conglomerate. It's almost as though you have to carve a certain amount of time out of your day to do that. So if your IVR approached that idea and was that respectful to callers' attention spans and their patience, it would go a long way to streamlining IVR and making it less of a hateful circle of hell type experience for people. Don't create fake mailboxes. It's okay to be a small company. So I voice for incredibly large companies. PetSmart is a huge client of mine, Victoria's Secret, Toyota. I do a lot of really high profile. I do as many little tiny mom and pop organizations, one or two guy companies. And almost all of the small companies want to sound bigger. So they actually create a bloated IVR menu that makes them sound like they're, that they have more staff than they actually do have, which is fine. I understand why you want to appear to be a bigger player on the market. I have heard nightmare stories of these mailboxes, and they all go to the same person, the same chief bottle washer guy. But some people have actually set up dedicated mailboxes and have not monitored them and found all sorts of, voicemail messages from crazy issues that are long since resolved. So just, I always encourage people, it's okay to be, a 1 or 2 extension company. And you can actually get into a lot of trouble by bloating that and pretending to be something you're not. Keep things simple. How many of us have been on an IVR in which there's been prompts like, you press 1. Are you sure you meant to press 1? Press 1 if you meant to press 1. Press 2 if you'd like to re-enter. And I read them practically every day. I think, Alan, you were telling me about one of your, running into that kind of situation all the time. So yes, it seems as though some IVRs are deliberately circuitous and crazy to use. So really keep it in mind that you want to streamline it and give people as few choices as possible and make the choices simple to understand. This whole trend of asking people to confirm their choice is getting way out of hand. My bank actually asks for my PIN number 3 different times throughout a typical phone call, just to see if it's changed or if you had the opportunity to change your PIN while you're on hold. You're not exactly
The
sure
worst
what.
is when they lose the information.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's common. Yeah, it's crazy. So this goes under keep things simple. This is an actual IVR schematic. I think it actually came from Matt Florell at Vici Dial. This was something one of his customers sent him. Wow. And sometimes voice talent actually gets sent something like this to voice. So this would be the wrong format to send to your voice talent. A lot of these are whispers. A lot of these are agent notes, private notes to the call center agents. So don't ever send this to somebody to voice your system. And it's good for you to realize exactly what goes where, but it's a little bit of a nightmare. And he said that's kind of a typical thing that he deals with. So yes, this gets back to the idea of always giving callers an opt-in. Again, people really do love to figure things out by themselves and not to have to launch into the same tale of woe over and over again to different agents. But always do give them that opt-in where they can actually stop serving themselves and let someone else take over the service. So front-load important messages, I kind of went into that a little bit. I always tell the example of, it was a cardiology clinic here in Florida, and they had 12 choices, which is way too many. And the very last choice was, if this is a medical emergency, please hang up and dial 911. Seriously, so that was after about 12 different choices. Imagine somebody having chest pains and not calling 911 and calling their cardiologist instead. So seriously, any important, frequently used, or life-threatening issues, make sure that is front stacked and not wandering around at the end of the IVR. So understand what constitutes a prompt. So this is a little tricky, and various different voice talents work differently. However, if you are submitting a script, okay, so this is straight from that article. Off to the left there, you have entered insert extension number, the desk of insert staff member's name. So you're getting that there's a lot of stuff in parentheses that are dropped in. The thing is, that's not all one prompt, and it's amazing how many people say, just record that whole thing and allow a little bit of time and we'll just drop the person's name in and we'll just drop their extension. No, you're not. I don't know of a system that can actually take a sound file and layer it on top of one that's already playing. So those actually need to be separate prompts. Prompt number 1 would be, you have entered extension 101, extension 102, and so on, right? So those are separate prompts that all get concatenated together. Does that make sense? Yeah. So this is at the risk of sounding like an episode of Schoolhouse Rock, if we all remember do you remember Schoolhouse Rock? Yes. So proper punctuation on concatenation. That's, Mouthful. So depending on how you write it and the proper use of ellipses will tell us what sort of cadence to give it. So in other words, thank you for calling with the ellipses at the end tells us obviously that there's something that's going to be tacked on to the end. Thank you for calling. That has a distinct end. And parentheses or ellipses at the beginning. So it will tell us obviously that this connects to something that's already voiced and so on. The PIN number, again, the bottom one obviously is ending in a finite period there, and that tells us that's the end of a thought. It seems really basic, but if you don't include these instructions, we're not sure where it falls in the sequence. If you're having a voice talent do short concatenated prompts such as numbers, months, days of the week, those sort of shorter things that need to flow together, it's actually important for them to do an upward ending inflection, downward ending, and neutral. You actually need 3 sets of them, and yes, it's more expensive, but if you don't, that's when you run into the issue of a telephone voice saying 7, 1, 8, 2, like it's just going to sound all kind of one level. So you need to have 3 different inflections and have that coded within your system to let you know when you need an upward inflecting, a downward, and so on. So hopefully that's fairly clear. Oh, do not give directions to your office or facilities. Chris Black here this year, he's a great guy, but every time he has me do an IVR for one of his companies, and he runs a lot of produce distributors, he is in love with press 9 for directions to our facility. If you're coming from the 401, head south, and if you've gone past the Walgreens, you've gone too far. I hate it. Okay, so these have never been instructions that we could ever follow real time anyhow. And now all phones and most cars that were manufactured in the last 10 years all have maps and GPS. So please don't do the directions to your facility. That's gone the way of the buggy whip right there. That's over. So give a pronunciation guide for proper names and places. So especially, this is really, really key when you're doing a staff directory and you know that there are proper names that are prone for mispronunciation. Mavrudis, for example, would be a tricky one if somebody didn't know what they were doing. Not everybody's name's Smith. So if you are sending in a script and there are tricky place name pronunciations, those are actually easy to look up online. But proper names, usually if you can assist in pronouncing those, it's usually very beneficial. This is a tricky one. Name your company something that requires no special instruction. So by the time people send me scripts, I'm usually pretty downstream of the idea that, people usually have their company name already sorted out by then. But keep it in mind that if you have a company name that requires really special coaching to say properly, I'm right now recording for a client and I have done 2 different recordings for him and it's still wrong. When I head back, I have to redo, and it's his name, it's his proper name, but I can't seem to, it's Viscoliosi. But he says I say it too Italian and then not Italian enough, and yeah, it's tricky. So yes, if you could perhaps keep that in mind when naming your company, like is it fishy, is it fishy? That one is actually a study in bad logo design because that's not a cat and dog clinic, that's a brake drum. It kind of really looks like a logo for PetSmart, doesn't it? Yeah. Isn't that funny? I know. Or yes, acquisition. How clever. Oh my gosh, you've taken a word and you've sort of ran with it and you changed the spelling, except that nobody's going to be able to find you online. No one's going to be able to turn to a browser and type in that spelling of acquisition. And I run into a lot of proper words that are, again, zhuzhed up a little to be clever, and it's great, but nobody's ever going to be able to find you online just by hearing your company's name. So keep it in mind if you're ever renaming a company. Google needed no instruction whatsoever, I'm just saying. This is really, really key, especially with on-hold systems. So don't go overboard with niceties. So we've all heard the whole, your time is precious to us and we understand that you're busy, and no, obviously you don't, or I wouldn't still be on hold. So make sure that you don't go overboard with all of these, and we've heard them all. So they become a little irritating, especially if someone's on hold for long periods of time. So that seems to be pretty evident. Read the copy out loud. It is amazing how different the written word is from the spoken word. I will voice an IVR and people will contact me and say, listen, this is not on you, this is nothing you did, but the words are just clunky and it just sounds weird. So it's kind of one of those things that words look fine on paper if you're just glancing at it visually. So I always encourage people to find an empty boardroom where no one will see you muttering to yourself and actually read the copy out loud. You will be amazed at the things that you will be able to hear that you weren't able to determine just by giving it a visual look over. Be clear on your company's image, or if you are installing, let's say, Asterisk for an end user, ask them to really be clear, or I go to a lot of websites before I record for people, because usually people are extremely clear on their corporate identity with their websites, with their social media presence, all of that, and they put a great deal of thought into it. For some reason, the IVR gets left out of that branding. So, and sometimes even the industry that an end user is in really give you much information either. I'm doing a lot of voicing for investment firms and banks, and you would think, oh, incredibly serious industries, money is serious, this is serious stuff. A lot of investment firms are trying to be more friendly, more accessible, more informal, and ultimately attracting a younger demographic. I just did one for an investment company where it was kind of like, you know, investing is not just for the elite or the super well-informed. We'll pair you up with someone and we'll determine, you know, where your risk aversion is. And, you know, it's, yeah. So there are certain industries that are trying to attract a different demographic, and sometimes the IVR needs to reflect that. So you need to decide if your end user is, you know, kind of the guy on the left, or is he a bit more relaxed, the guy on the right? It's important to have that identity sorted out and make sure that the IVR reflects that. Does that make sense? Hope so. Yeah, don't front load your opening prompt with too much information. So I've taken the identifying details out of this prompt, but this is verbatim what I was sent probably about 6 months ago from an IT company who's saying things like, "You'll never wait long for our legendary service." This message times out to about 1.5 minutes. And, you know, our fast response time is unparalleled, you know. But first you have to listen to this, you know, 2-minute commercial. So, again, this sort of information, sure, in an on-hold system, if somebody is forced to sit in on-hold purgatory until they get service, absolutely tell them how long you've been in business and why you're better than your competitor. But this was an opening greeting, and yeah. And the following 12 options too, so they violated that rule as well. Yeah, I don't think they're going to get to my, my problem quickly. Oh, yes, okay, so, and the final aspect is that if you want conversational, write it that way. So luckily, I'm not asked frequently, except for this scoliosis guy, I'm not asked for too many redos, but the #1 reason would be, it sounds really robotic. It sounds very, you know, automated. And yes, a lot of people still want that sort of automaton sound, that very efficient telephone voice sound, which is kind of my default, and that's what I do. But if people want things to sound conversational, and I'm really glad that they do. This is kind of how the industry is changing, is that they're after sort of more of a conversational tone. If you want it that way, write it that way. And that goes for prompts that are purely instructional. There is a way to write them in a slightly more personable way. Where I get into problems, I do a lot of voicing for pharmaceutical information lines. So you know those magazine ads for any kind of a pharmaceutical product, they have all of the contraindications and all the specifications for the medication. It's amazing. They want those read conversationally. So I struggle with that. I say things like, well, you should know that some of the side effects of rel packs include, you know, and I have to go into the whole thing about blindness and stroke and talk about it conversationally. So it's very strange. So I'm glad to see people are moving towards a more conversational tone with IVR. I welcome it. Just make sure that it's written in such a way that the voice talent can relax with the copy and that the copy isn't purely business-like and instructional. So that is pretty much my whole thing. Oh, I did want to remind you that it's not a plug for my company, but almost all good IVR starts here. That's my vocal cords, okay? Yeah, aw. Perfectly healthy, but they look disgusting. It looks awful. Yeah, so I would love to open this up for questions. Do people have any sort of, oh, Mr. Balashov, there we are. All right. From the People's Republic of Atlanta, Georgia.
Yes. To your point number 15, the last one.
Yes, sir.
Have you ever encountered a request, and I asked this for entertainment value only, have you ever encountered a request where the content was woefully mismatched to the ask for conversational style, not in terms of how the copy was written, but thematically, the subject matter itself just did not lend itself to that?
The only thing that really comes to mind recently was a chain of funeral homes that, again, were trying to attract a younger clientele. So they were actually, I know! So they were actually, by that I mean, they were actually trying to get younger people to think about investing in their funeral portfolios. So in addition to your 401k, you're a young, responsible person, you're looking after all of this savings and all of this, why not add your funeral into that whole thing and make sure that that's all taken care of so that, God forbid, if anything should happen. So yes, it was extremely, they wanted it very, very casual and off the cuff, which will alienate really sad, maybe older people who are calling in, but this was their attempt to snag a younger demographic in the funeral business, if you can imagine. Another one, I think I was telling Alan Percy last night, there was an auto body shop, and they attacked the idea head on that anybody who is anyone who's calling an auto body shop is probably not in a great mood. So they capitalized on that and they said, listen, we understand it, you're not having a great day. Get all your information together, we're going to get you back on the road because we understand that without your car, you're not yourself. And I love that. Literally, anybody who calls there would not be there recreationally or not because they're in a good mood, is because, your day is really not all that great. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I love the whole move towards the conversational sound, and I try to talk people into loosening up a little bit and introducing humor.
For which it's just not appropriate.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think I told a couple people here already, just before I left for this conference, I did a bunch of messages for the Vermont Sex Offender Registry. And so that's weird. And I joked and I said, so do you want my really seductive voice? And they said, no. No, it had to be very, very threatening. You're a bad boy and you have not checked in with your parole officer, that kind of thing. I turn up in the weirdest places. I really do. Actually, I have a question for you, kind of industry leaders. So, with things like Google Voice being so incredibly good and speech synthesis coming so far, do you see, obviously there's huge changes in IVR. How do you see me adapting for my industry? Am I going to be obsolete in a few years or no? Okay.
Few decades.
What?
No, I think your volume can go up, essentially.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, because there's going to be more voices.
Yeah, this is true. And, I'm already sort of on the track, hopefully, to voice for Google soon. And I have been a swap-in voice, or I've just been developed as a swap-in voice for Amazon Alexa. So for those who don't care for Alexa, hopefully soon I will be considered to be the swap-in voice. I know. So people will be swearing at me all over. But yeah, so I'm just...
Does that work on a royalty basis? Or?
We haven't worked it out, Michael. Maybe I'll send you in to negotiate, yeah. I'm just sort of worried that IVR maybe might go the way of the buggy whip, as we've said already. Do you have any opinions?
I had the same discussion in the machine learning session.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Where, today's voice talent probably doesn't have much to worry about. There's like the 16-year-old Allison out there today.
Yeah.
Who, will take one sample, and that's it. You get paid for that sample.
Exactly.
And now they can use that for 1,000 years.
Absolutely.
And just recreate commercials, whatever they
Yeah,
to do with that.
yeah, oh, yeah.
And then- I'm sorry.
Well, it's always been a concern, and that I mentioned that I did a Kestrel voice a few years ago, and it's still their #1 seller, which is great. So, yeah, see, there you go. Patrick from Kestrel really depressed me one day because we were having a phone call, and he said, well, your voice probably got Trump elected, because he knows of many political auto dialers that actually use my voice. I'm sorry. Yeah, so there you go. Yeah, I'm part of the problem. Who knows? Yeah. So it turns up wherever, and it could turn up in very, very sinister ways. And the other thing about open source is that once I voice prompts and they leave my studio, they're out in the ether, and I don't control it, so I have to charge accordingly, with the idea that I'm never going to see another cent from it. But yeah, but it hasn't been a bad thing at all. It's been a lot of recurring revenue just from this community. It's been good. Yes. Oh, sorry.
You forgot the whole microphone.
Oh, that's okay.
So about a week ago, I ran into some really ancient sound files, and you sound completely different.
You mentioned that.
Do you ever need to go back and match them? Or?
No, and in
I
fact,
just had
Carlos.
to not mix them because they didn't work together at all.
No. The feedback that I get typically is that a lot of my sounds today dovetail really well with stuff that I've done a while back. So, I'm older now. I'm in my late 20s now. And no, I mean, obviously the voice, I think, lowers, and I think I have a bit more gravitas than I had when I first started doing Asterisk prompts. But literally, no, I don't run into any. And you did mention that. And I thought, oh my God, I sound old. But no, I think it seems to dovetail well. This is the feedback I get, so I don't know.
Yeah, sticking them one after the other just didn't work.
As long as I still look the same. No, I'm kidding.
I'm curious and would love to hear a story about one that you would not voice or record.
Oh, actually.
Or maybe a good one too.
Good one. Actually, there was an initiative to strike down gay marriage. And it was one of those weird phone patches where I don't do that often, where I have a bunch of people listening to me recording, but I had an engineer and the client and a couple of other people, and I had the engineer put everyone else on mute, and I said, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable. I just, it sort of went against what I believed in, and so I recused myself from the job, and he found someone else. But apart from that, I don't know, it would have to be very, very offensive, and I do some F-bombs if it's justified and there's a comic payback, but yeah, I've turned down excessively profane stuff, but Brian West has this ability to get me to do pretty much anything. Yeah, I don't know. He has this power over me. I don't know. Hi.
Hi, thank you. I'm curious if some of the rules and some of the things we're talking about, because this has been very affirming. I came into PBX and voice by accident, and I've wound up building over 200 IVRs for various clients.
Wow.
But I'm exclusively in the Mid-South,
Okay.
and most of them want to utilize IVR after letting the phone ring quite a bit. However, they eventually come around and go, well, but receptionist or this person's having to answer the phone too much. It's like, well, go to an IVR. Well, that's too impersonal.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I'm curious about now, and the reason I'm asking this is when I have customers outside the South, they
Yeah.
almost exclusively want an IVR from the get-go.
Yes.
So do you observe some I guess two questions. Do you observe regionally, because if I'm deploying PBXs, do you observe different preferences regionally for us to keep in mind? And then back to what I first started with, how would you argue the benefit of start with the IVR, don't just have ringing?
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a great question. I don't think I can really speak on exactly the sequencing of when someone would bring in an IVR in a call, simply because I'm just the talent. I just record the sound files and send them off. I don't know. Maybe other developers in the room could better answer that question.
I can comment on it because
Yeah.
we almost always bring the phones before the IVR for
It-
all of our customers. And it started to become a trend, and then now I advise them to do it. And they just go on D&D if they're not going to answer it.
in 60 seconds from when they dial the number, in 60 seconds, they need to be with a person or a voicemail or in a queue.
Yes.
Because if they're still hearing ringing and then options and we're at 60 seconds, they're hanging up. So that's kind of, we've done the same, but,
45 seconds before the IVR, no.
yeah.
So that brings up actually a question that I'd like to ask.
Yes.
And when we talk about trends, and you're probably the first person to kind of see the trends. So what new trends are you seeing? Like one of the personal things I see a lot is you just call someone, it's purported to be a cell phone number, it's just an SMS and MMS enabled number.
Yep.
And it's press 1 to actually speak to the person, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to circumvent the robo-dialers.
Yes. Yeah.
So what do you see? Do you do a lot of recordings for something like that? Or is there like another trend that you see?
I'm seeing more and more people who are giving a call back option, which is great. So to not lose your place in queue, leave your number and we'll call you back. And I've had great experiences with that. I've heard people object to it and say, no, I never got a call back. I almost always get a call back precisely when they say they will, which is great. But yeah, I would say that there's maybe a bit more flexibility in contact. I personally really hate it when I'm on hold and I hear, have you visited our website? It's at yes, I've already been to your website and that's why I'm on the phone, because my problem, again, is so specific or I'm so unhappy that I need to take it out on a live agent. So, like recently, I was actually on hold for 1 hour and a half. I actually put it up on Facebook. I took a photo of my Sangoma phone and said, look at that timer. Can you believe I'm still here? I would have been horribly irritated if there had been on hold sequences that kept coming back on saying, we know your time is valuable. We appreciate your patience. No, you don't. So yeah, I would say that the trends that I'm seeing, and I've sort of touched on that during this presentation, is a warming up IVR, interjecting personality into it in such a way that it doesn't disrespect perhaps an older demographic calling in. I think there is a way to accommodate and to just sort of enforce the company's identity. Don't be afraid to introduce some personality, and humor is not appropriate in every instance, but I would say it's welcomed in most IVRs. Yeah, yeah, right there. Hi.
Wait.
Oh, let's go through your wrap-ups.
Personally, it's a very pleasure for me to know you and to meet you here.
Thank you. You too.
Because I'm from Brazil, and we hear a lot of your voice on the demos, on the Asterisk, and it's very different to know you here.
Yes.
And two little questions. If you pretend to learn Portuguese or something like that in your team to record voice in Portuguese.
Yeah.
And if you already got angry on a QE voice, hearing your voice on that QE.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you already got angry because you were waiting so long time on the QE?
Absolutely. Yeah. Now I did learn a little bit of Spanish, and it's progressed a great deal, Carlos, from the first time you sent me Spanish. So I'm almost like an opera singer that sings in a language that's not native to her, but comprehends basically what I'm saying. So I've managed to do Spanglish, as I call it. So it is suitable for most bilingual requirements for American IVRs. But Portuguese, yeah, I wish there was time. I have the Swedes asking me if I can do Swedish, and there's only a certain amount of hours in the day.
But do you, the voice is just you, or do you have any team with a lot of voices and languages?
Yeah,
to record.
no. Okay, so I'm not an agency, and throughout the years it's been suggested to me that maybe I should have like a roster of talent. I just don't want to be an agent. So it is basically me. Because I'm based in Canada, I have a fair amount of clients that want a French-Canadian talent, so I have a French-Canadian dude that I recommend for work, and we sort of have a reciprocal thing. And occasionally, if there's multiple voices that people require, typically for YouTube videos or explainer videos, e-learning modules, often they'll want like a cast of characters. So I do have colleagues friends of mine that I can recommend who have a similar setup as well, their own studios. But yeah, I get away from the whole idea of brokering other talent just because I'm too busy myself recording, and I have to maintain quality with all these other voices. So yeah, no, it's just me.
Did you actually started with Asterisk or before you already?
Oh, before Asterisk, yeah.
Before
yeah.
Asterisk,
So my
yeah.
background is actually in theater. I have a BFA in drama, and I started doing voiceovers as a way of paying the bills in between acting jobs, and it just sort of took over. And so TELUS in Alberta, who I mentioned, that was my first IVR job. So that sort of put me on the map for IVR, and then Digium called, and then IVR is now my wheelhouse. It's kind of my niche, and it's an interesting niche. I
Yeah.
still do some broadcast stuff, but for the most part, it's IVR all day, every day.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well,
Any more questions?
I guess that's it.
I think we could take one more.
Can we? Anybody? Anybody? Oh, Babashoff.
So that's not so much a question, but to your question about the obsolescence of people like yourself, or the discussion around that,
Yeah.
I think realistically, there is a tier of fairly bureaucratic, unimaginative, kind of robotic-sounding IVRs that probably is very complementary to automation. However, the moment it requires an awareness of these kinds of human factors, contours, inflections whose contours suit the human parameters of the situation,
Yes.
start to realize there's a lot of human capital thought that goes into this, and a lot of social intelligence, and it's more than just recording a voice.
Yeah.
And there's a need for that service that neither neural networks nor speech synthesis nor large computing clusters can accommodate. So there's a need to direct that process. And
Yes.
yeah, there is absolutely a tier of announcements and IVRs that are practically like the airport ATIS, surface temperature is 87 degrees Fahrenheit, which
Listen
they'd never
to
say, but
that,
you know what I mean. Yeah, that probably can be synthesized,
Yeah.
and probably lends itself well to that, and that will probably continue to accelerate. But it's like your commodity IVR, true. It's the Walmart
Yes.
of IVR.
For sure, yeah. I think they'll always require a human to make that judgment call of, if you're voicing the IVR for a drug treatment center, you're going to want to have somebody with a compassionate tone and somebody who's reassuring and warm, not patronizing, obviously, but actually you and I got into a discussion that was cut off too short yesterday about vocal trends, especially in females, and I actually have a little side business where I coach young women to stop talking like Valley Girls and Kardashians. But it's amazing how many people actually ask for that, like, thank you for calling. And they want that vocal fry, So I try to coach that out of people, but sometimes if it's a younger demographic as well that they're trying to appeal to, sometimes I actually whore myself out and I actually... And upspeak, where the ends of the sentences are in the form of a question, like that's really prevalent, especially in Canada. I think it's a Canadian thing. We're afraid to say things in a definitive way. We're apologetic. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay, Allison, thank
Cool.
you for coming in
Thank
today.
you. Thanks,
Our
guys.
distinguished guest, the
That was
voice
great.
of Asterisk.